my name's Jade and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in June. I'm actually filming this before the end of the month, so I don't know yet how many books I read this month. I have a trip coming up and it's just messing all up with my schedule. Editing Jade will tell you how many books I did in fact end up reading. As it stands right now, I have 6 books to talk about. One of them is poetry and the other 5 are novels. Again, Editing Jade will tell you how many novels she ended up actually reading. It's been a slow reading month for me this month. I've been busy and I've been stressed, and that's definitely impacted the amount I've been reading, which is fine. Like, who actually cares how much you read in the month? The only bugbear from me is when I've been reading a book for so long, I've started to get kind of like impatient and I just want it to end, and that definitely impacted at least 2 of the books that I read this month. I don't know when this started happening. It usually take me like a month to read a book. It usually take me so long, and now that I've gotten into like a book a week kind of habit, when it takes me longer than that, I get really kind of irritable and impatient. It is what it is, I guess. First book was the poetry collection that I read, and that is Carol Ann Duffy's The World's Wife. I love this edition as well. I think it's so pretty. I love how Medusa has like foiling on her, and I really enjoyed this. So I'm definitely gonna like collect more in this. I think there's more in like this edition. So The World's Wife is based on the premise of like taking these famous female figures and giving them back their voice, kind of seen from their perspective, kind of reinterpreting their experiences. Have Little Red Cap, aka Little Red Riding Hood, Thetis, Queen Herod, Mrs. Midas, there's like a Mrs. Quasimodo I think as well, Mrs. Tiresias, Pilot's Wife, Mrs. Aesop, Mrs. Darwin, Queen Con, Anne Hathaway, Delilah, loads of figures. I wish I knew them all. Some of them I had no idea who they were and what their stories were, so kind of comparing this kind of reimagination of their story, like I was just taking it for a story because I didn't know where it was coming from. I did Google some of them, like there's some twins in here that are female versions of real like twins that existed, like these gangster like male twins from, like I think they were from London, but they were all really interesting nonetheless. Quite a lot of them do come from Greek myth, so I recognise quite a few of those. I adored the premise of this. I thought it was so interesting. I also think the poems were really well written. I mean, Carol Ann Duffy is a very famous poet, so no surprise there. And it's rare that I actually feel strongly about poetry collections, so just the fact that like I really enjoyed this one, I'm really happy with it. Also just like a display of such wide imagination. Like they're not all necessarily feminist retellings in the way that we expect feminist retellings to be. They're very different from each other and they take on different forms and structures, and it's just really interesting. I would give it 8 out of 10 overall. Next up is a fantasy novel. It's been so long since I've read fantasy. I'm really looking forward to reading more fantasy in like autumn and winter. There's so many that I want to read, but this one is like a more summery fantasy book, so if you want a summery fantasy recommendation, then there's this. Everyone's been talking about it recently, which is why I read it, and that is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is actually my first Shannon Chakraborty book. I know the Daybed trilogy by her is pretty well known. I feel like this might be connected to it in some way, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm definitely up for reading that anyway. I really enjoyed this. It's about pirates and I love pirates. I need to read more pirate books. If you have any pirate books or film recommendations, please let me know down below. I think it's like the beginning of her last big adventure. Maybe it's the first book in a trilogy. Amina al-Sirafi is a very kind of famous pirate. Lots of people have heard of her. She's in, you know, a man's world. There's not very many women pirates. She's kind of retired because she has a daughter now and she needs to look after her mother, and she's getting older. She keeps being referred to as middle-aged, but I couldn't for the life of me like figure out how old that actually was. Then this job comes up, so much money offered that she cannot possibly turn it down, and maybe she actually kind of misses pirating, maybe? And things spiral. It may not all be as it seems, and it sets up for, I think, a really great arc of a trilogy. I'm not sure how it's gonna, like, I feel like it could be a series. I feel like we could have more than just 2 more books, but I'll trust Shannon. I loved the character of Amina. She was so feisty. She was so much fun. She was like good in all the right ways, but also like naughty in all the right ways and mischievous in all the right ways. I listened to the audiobook for this one, which I love the formatting on because we kind of switch from between 2 narrators. It's predominantly narrated by Amina, but it's kind of another person is the one who's actually sitting down and compiling the story, and so we get their interjections every now and then. I cannot remember who the narrators are. I didn't write them down on my notes, so I'm going to put them up on screen. But they did fantastic jobs, especially the narrator for Amina. Like, I feel like she really came to life. The characters were so good. The character in here who's kind of antagonistic, if you read it I think you know who I mean, but he's not like the lead antagonist. He's just kind of annoying and he's just kind of there, but he also, like, I don't know. I loved that character. He was so funny. I've never like had like an antagonistic character that I've liked in this way before. I kind of like him though. It was just so much fun. I will say the thing happened where towards the end I was like zoning out a little bit, where I just like wanted to finish it. It was taking me longer to read it than I anticipated because I'd been so busy and couldn't commit to as much time to it. So it was completely my fault. But I did force myself to go back and listen when like the beginning of the end came. I was like, I need to concentrate now. This is important. And I understood everything. It's also it's a historical setting. Like, it takes place in and around the east, or any of these, the Maldives, Mecca, Jerusalem, like, these are real places. Madagascar is that kind of land. She's not called a pirate captain, she's called a Nahuda, and there's like lots of worlds, and it's a very rich environment, and it's so interesting. And I love those kinds of settings, especially for like pirate stories. They bring it to life in a new, really great way, and it blends in fantasy so well. Great setting, great characters, great writing, amazing premise. The only thing I can really criticize it on is that like my interest and attention started to like phase a little bit, but I think that was the timing. Oh, and there were a couple plot points that were slightly outlandish and I didn't quite expect, and it just, the tone changed, and I wasn't ready for it. The bird section is what I'm referring to if you've read it. I think I like it more than an 8. I'm either an 8.25 or an 8.5. That's what I'm gonna. I really enjoyed this. It was so much fun. I cannot wait for the second book. And next up is a rom-com, and that is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I also audiobooked this one. I really enjoyed the narrator's voice, so I think she was perfect for the character. And it was narrated by, did I write it down this time? Yes, Katie Shore. So Sally Thorne wrote Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match, which I read last year. I'll link the video where I talk about it down below. It's like her most famous. I feel like it might be her debut. Yeah, it's her debut. It's like big on TikTok, and I think she's written a couple other rom-coms, 99% Mine, and there's like the one with the turtles on the cover that I can't remember the name of, but I'm definitely want to read both of those now. This was so much fun. We're following Lucy, and she is like a good girl. She works hard, she gets stuff done. Everyone in the office likes her. She works in a publishing house. Apart from the one person she has to spend every day with, Joshua Templeman. They're both like PAs to like the big bosses. Two different publishing houses had to merge together, and so they kind of like got stuck with each other. They play these games against each other. I don't know if it's like ever said aloud that they're playing the games, or if she just thinks it in her head. Like, they have the staring game and they have the HR game. There's a lot of games. There's a lot of them, and they both, I mean, maybe it's never said aloud, but he's on board. He's playing the game back. It is a really fun premise. I had a lot of fun with it. I will say, our main character, is she kind of dumb at times? Yeah, she is. Is she pretty immature with all these games, and she just like does not relent throughout the whole thing? Yeah, pretty immature. Also, I really liked Josh, but in the beginning, like the way they were talking to each other, and especially him to her, I don't know if this is because it's a guy and he's talking to a girl, but I feel like she didn't go as far as he took it. HR like really did need to get involved. Like, it almost was giving sexual harassment vibes. I don't know how to say it without spoiling it, but like when the first move is made, I didn't feel comfy. But when we got past that stage, I feel like it was in and around paintball. Maybe from there on it was really fun. I can't remember. The beginning was a bit iffy for me. I saw the ending coming, but I wanted it to be different. I wanted it to work out differently. Yeah, it did kind of give me similar feelings to Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match, now that I think about it, but they're so different, it's hard to compare the two. I enjoyed this. If you're looking for a fun, silly rom-com, hate to love vibes, I do recommend it. I do think it was good. I'd give it like a 7, maybe 7.5 out of 10. Okay, and then the last book as of filming this that I've actually finished is One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. I've only ever read from her the Atlas Six. I haven't read A Love for You in the Ether or the Atlas Paradox yet, or any of her self-published works. I have this stunning Waterstones edition, and just the cover with the foiling, it's just a really gorgeous copy. I love how like the red and the white contrast each other, and like the red makes it a little bit more sinister and dark, because it definitely has like a darker tone to it. I feel like all of these books generally do, from the two that I've read. They have a really sophisticated writing style, and the characters are always, again, from the two that I read, but I just can tell. I can tell that it's a her thing. This is just how she writes her books. The characters are just like oh so entertaining and fun and snarky. She writes romance really well. Like she writes romance really deep and sophisticated, like this like deep love. It's very Shakespearean vibes, which is on brand, because when I talked about this in my anticipated releases, I was like, it's giving me big Romeo and Juliet vibes, and like all of the parts are broken down into acts like it's a Shakespeare play with Romeo and Juliet quotes. So it's like it's more or less a Romeo and Juliet. Retelling feels too hard. Definitely inspired, there's definitely the vibes, but we're following two warring witch families in New York City. The siblings in particular, like they're in that time where they're starting to take on more and more responsibility, and they're kind of what they do, they have a ton of responsibility in terms of their families, and they're really like starting to mess with each other. It's so interesting the way it's a read. I don't want to say too much about this because I don't want to spoil it, but the way it's Romeo and Juliet, like it's not as clear cut as it seems at first. I feel like I prefer the characters in the Atlas Six more. There's definitely more serious tone in this one, where the Atlas Six has like room for some shenanigans because of how intense the situation. Like it's an intense, like they're legitimately at war. Lives are at stake, and it's a lot. It's just very intense in general. Like when it's dark, it's darkly intense, and when it's like romantic, it's intensely romantic. The plot was like, it moves quickly. When we got to like the halfway point, I was like, I thought this would be the climax. Like, where do we go from here? I never knew where it was going to go. I was so fascinated and enthralled the whole time. It was pretty readable, easy to read. I loved the world, and it's like this wintry New York setting with these witches and their own system, and it all felt very grounded and real to me. There are one or two plot points. There's a biggie towards the end, and but why? I don't understand. But why? Like it kind of makes sense, but also not really. And like when it's such like a big important plot point like that, I want to understand it. The characters, they don't necessarily talk in riddles, but they can be quite vague in their intentions and what they're going to do and things, and so it's left for the reader to pick up what they're putting down, which I love that she kind of treats us that way, and it's you have to use your brain. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm clever enough, Olivia, to always pick up what you're putting down. Yeah, it's annoying. I think this thing happened again where the more I read it, I was like, I've been reading this for a while now, I want to move on to something different. Which again, not necessarily the book's fault, but I do think had that not happened and had I understood the plot points, my rating would be much higher. For now, I'm thinking more of like an 8 out of 10. It was really solid. I really wanted to give it higher because I loved the world so much, and there's so much like about it that like take it all apart I love. It's just that as a whole, I don't know like how it's going to stand up over time. I still think it was really solid, and I was putting it off for ages, and now that I've read it, I'm like, I cannot wait for Masters of Death to come out in August, I believe. That's my next Olivia Blake book on the agenda. So I have two books that I've not quite finished yet, but I think I'm close enough that I can tell you the premise and tell you my vague thoughts, and then editing Jade will fill you in if she's right or not and how the endings impacted my thoughts. First one is The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. I'm listening to this via audiobook. I only have like an hour left, so I'm like, I'm pretty, you know, I'm nearly there. I feel like I know what's happening. Narrated by Cindy Kay and Jonathan Cole. Jonathan Cole, okay, so he's English. The way that Cindy narrates the male lead, his name, Connor. The way Cindy narrates Connor's voice is very like intense clipped British accent, whereas Jonathan has that like more laid back accent, and so that already just like it is really hard for me to compute what this character is given overall. But also he sounds like the guy from Bridgerton. It's French, he's got accents, his voice just outright reminds me of him, so now all I can picture is him, and that's not the description. White with green eyes and a brown queef hairdo, and he's like supposed to be tall and like built like a tree, and that's just not, I'm just imagining the guy from Bridgerton. You know what, I'm not mad at imagining that, it's just that every time they say like what he looks like, I'm like, wait, what? No. Anyway, the premise of this one, so you follow Connor and Fizzy. Fizzy came up in The Soulmate Equation, also by Christina Lauren. So she writes romance books, and she kind of has lost her romance spark. Like, she is having trouble in her own dating life. And Connor he makes like wildlife documentaries trying to save the planet, educational, you know the kind of documentary. But his boss wants him to make a reality TV show, like a dating show, because that's what the higher ups want and that's what's going to make money, and he wants to keep his job and he needs this job because it's close to his daughter. So he's like, sure, okay, fine, I have to do this, and he really wants to like if he's going to do it, he wants to do it right. And so he comes up with this idea that like loops Fizzy in so that she's the lead of this dating show. Can we see where this is going? But then like they start hanging out and things start happening between the two of them. Such a fun premise. I've been having so much fun with this one. I've missed being in a good Christina Lauren world. I don't know why I say good. The most part, the On Honeymooners onwards, it's just something about them. They have a quality to them. I don't know obviously how this book is gonna resolve. Where I'm at is like the low point, and I think we're gonna start coming back up again soon. Things are gonna start clicking into place and make sense again. I don't think by any means it's necessarily my favourite Christina Lauren, but I do think it's up there. I think I probably like it more than I like The Soulmate Equation, but it's been so long since I read The Soulmate Equation. I don't remember it very well, to be honest. Maybe I need to reread that one. Like, it's upper mid for me, Christina Lauren. It's just a lot of fun. I don't know how to describe it other than saying fun. That's all I can say, because I just keep like giggling and doing like the swarmy feels reading it. Swoony, not swarmy. Feel like it's gonna be a 7 out of 10. I need to like look back at, rethink what I gave The Hating Game and look at what I gave the rest of Christina Lauren's books to kind of figure out where it will land fully. But that's where I anticipate it being roughly. But the other book I'm currently reading is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which is an Iliad retelling, so it's the Trojan War, but it's from the point of view of Briseis. Briseis is Achilles' war prize, Achilles being like one of the main fighters in the Trojan War. I'm assuming you know the Trojan War. Briseis normally doesn't get a say. I know this is the first book in a trilogy, and I've had it on my shelf for ages now, and I'm definitely going to read the rest of the trilogy, I can tell you that right now. Only other thing I've read by Pat Barker is Regeneration. I've also only read the first book in that trilogy. I own the second book and I have not read it yet. They have very similar vibes. Like, I don't know if war books is her thing, but the way she writes war, it's not necessarily gritty in the sense that it's really dark and edgy, but it feels very real. Visceral. It's not necessarily crass and like gross for the sake of being gross, but it's gross because war is gross. It's those vibes. It's violent because war just is violent. It doesn't necessarily ham it up in any way. It's just kind of very matter of fact, this is what war looks like, this is what like these conditions probably were like. Harsh reality of it all. I will say one thing with this one, the way they talk like they say lads and come on, and it feels very modern, their language use, which must be purposeful. It feels very English as well. I don't know that I love it just because it takes me out of it a little bit, but I mean it's a stylistic choice and I respect that. It's very easy to read. I'm finding it going by quickly. I'm enjoying it and I'm liking it. I'm just not loving it. I do think the relationship between Briseis and Achilles' character in general, there's a lot of nuance there. Like, he's not painted necessarily in the best light, obviously, but it's not just necessarily that he's all bad either. Like, it's complex. And I really appreciate that. I think the writing's pretty solid. It feels very tangible. It feels like I'm there with them. I don't know that I'm as grounded in all the characters as I want to be, but I think, again, that's just the start of the story. We're really with Briseis. I don't know. I don't have any major qualms with it, per se. I just, like I said, I'm liking it. I'm not loving it. Maybe something will happen in the last 100 pages that will change my mind, one way or the other. I would anticipate it being somewhere between a 7 and an 8. Yeah. And those were all the books that I read in June. Please let me know what you read in June down below. If you've read any of these and you have any opinions, I'd love to hear them in the comments. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!